Welcome, curious minds, to the Deep Dive, where we plunge into the most compelling ideas shaping our world. Today, we're kicking things off with, well, a statement that might just rattle your understanding of our economic reality. Capitalism is dead.
It's definitely a provocative claim, isn't it? But for Yanis Varoufakis, the former finance minister of Greece, it's not just a metaphor or some prediction about the future. He's diagnosing our current economic landscape. And coming from someone who, well, literally navigated the chaos of a major financial crisis, it kind of demands our attention.
That's exactly right. Our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack this incredibly audacious claim from his book, Technofeudalism, What Killed Capitalism. Varoufakis argues that capital itself, but like a new, mutated, much more powerful form, has actually killed its host, capitalism, and replaced it with something he calls technofeudalism. So for you, the learner, our goal here is to give you a shortcut to understanding this, well, pretty revolutionary framework. Forget the daily headlines about inflation or recessions for a moment. Varoufakis is saying we're fundamentally misunderstanding the whole system.
Yeah, he thinks we're looking at the wrong dials.
Exactly. This deep dive should give you some crucial aha moments, help you grasp why the world feels so different, maybe why profit seems less relevant for some huge companies, and importantly, who really holds the power now.
Yeah, we'll definitely test his core claims. Like, is profit really obsolete for the big tech titans? We need to examine that idea that digital rent, not competitive profit, is now the prime driver. And this whole techno-feudalism thing, is it genuinely a new mode of production, like a fundamental shift? Or is it, just monopoly capitalism, supersized, hyperscaled?
Good question. And what about cloud capital? He calls it the new land, the new fiefdom. Does that analogy hold up when platforms can, rise and fall so quickly?
We should dig into that. And also how things like AI and this constant data extraction fit into this new reality. Who's paying for what, really? Let's unpack this.
Okay, so let's jump right into the core of it. Varoufakis' audacious claim, capitalism as we knew it is gone, kaput. And he's not talking about some, far-off sci-fi future. He says it's already happened, driven by these screens we stare at all day or cloud-linked gadgets, and crucially, the actions of central banks since 2008.
Yeah, the fallout from the financial crisis is absolutely central to his argument. And what's really fascinating is the irony he points out, the very thing that killed capitalism, capital itself. But like you said, not the old industrial kind or even 20th century finance capital. It's a new mutation, way more powerful. He describes it almost like an overzealous virus that killed its host.
An overzealous virus. Wow, so not a slow evolution, but a dramatic systemic shift happening kind of under the radar.
That's the idea. And he points to two main culprits, two big developments that spurred this mutation. First, the massive privatization of the internet, mostly by U.S. and Chinese big tech companies. Think about the early internet. It had this sort of digital commons feel, right? Open, accessible. Varoufakis argues that got systematically enclosed, fenced off, just like the common lands in England centuries ago.
Right, the enclosures, but digital this time, creating private fiefdoms online.
Exactly, turning a shared resource into private property, giving these tech giants immense control. The second killer. The unprecedented response of Western governments and central banks to the 2008 crisis, all those trillions printed and injected into the system. He argues that while it maybe saved the banks, it inadvertently fueled this mutation of capital, the very thing that would end up replacing capitalism, kind of like feeding the monster that eats you.
A narrative of unintended consequences on a massive scale. So how did a former finance minister arrive at such a, radical thesis? He talks about his own journey, starting with his father's historical materialism.
Yeah, it's quite a story. Imagine being 6 years old, and your dad is using the fireplace to explain how transforming matter like iron to steel shapes human society itself, that physical change driving social change. And then he layers on Hesiode's ancient Greek lament about technology's dark side. So there's this deep-seated awareness of both the power and the potential peril of technological shifts right from the start.
It's quite an upbringing. And then there's his mother's experience as a chemist, which led him to this crucial duality framework. Can you unpack that a bit? It seems really central.
It really is. He talks about the duality of wage labor. So on one hand, you have exchange value. That's your wage, your salary, what you get paid for your time, your skills, quantifiable. But on the other hand, there's experiential value. This is the unrewarded stuff, the passion, the flair, the dedication, maybe even the joy you put into your work, stuff that can't really be bought or sold directly. The genuine smile, the extra effort.
That makes so much sense. All that value that doesn't show on a timesheet. He connects this duality to Marx, obviously, with commodified labor, but also Einstein. How does Einstein fit in?
Well, it's about duality again. Like Einstein's theory of light being both wave and particle, Varoufakis sees labor as having these two natures. He even quotes Einstein saying basically that a worker's pay isn't determined by the value of what they actually produce. This reinforces his idea that capitalism inherently splits labor. It pays for the commodity part, the exchange value, but it often ignores or even relies on the experiential value without paying for it.
So it's an inherent tension. Does this duality framework, this Marx-Keynes-Einstein fusion, is it really insightful, practically speaking, or is it more of a grand intellectual flourish?
I think he argues it's deeply practical for understanding now. Because if you see labor, and also money, as having this dual nature being both a commodity and a reflection of social power or experience, it changes how you see value extraction. He claims tech platforms are now masters at capturing that uncommodified experiential value for free. Our posts, our clicks, our feelings, while selling the commodified attention or data derived from it.
Okay, I see the connection there.
And this dual view also applies to money, influenced heavily by Keynes. Keynes basically said economists treating money just as a simple commodity are missing the point, like trying to use flat earth geometry in curved space. Money, for Keynes and Varoufakis, also reflects social relations, trust, technology. It's not just neutral stuff. This dual perspective lets him trace the shift from feudalism, where land and labor weren't really commodities, you were just born into your role.
Right, no choice, fixed destiny.
Exactly. Then capitalism comes along, commodifies land through enclosures, commodifies labor. Suddenly you have the freedom to choose your employer, your work. But often, as Varoufakis puts it, that was just freedom to lose.
Freedom to starve if you didn't take the factory job.
Precisely. So the left's original goal, he argues, was emancipation from that kind of unfreedom. And he sets this up to ask, what kind of freedom and what kind of unfreedom are we facing now in this new system?
Okay, so with that philosophical toolkit, the dualities, the historical context, let's track how capitalism supposedly morphed.
Yeah.
Varoufakis points to the Mad Men era, mid-20th century advertising, as a really key turning point. Don Draper's famous line, "You are the product, you feeling something." That, for Varoufakis, signals capitalism shifting towards this skillful manufacture of desire.
Right. This is where commodification takes a really interesting, maybe more insidious turn. Capitalism had already commodified land, labor, but post-war, it started targeting something much more internal, our experiential value. Think about nostalgia, emotions, our attention itself, that Instagram photo of your lunch. You didn't get paid, but that feeling, that shared experience, feeds the algorithm, keeps people scrolling, helps sell ads.
Or online reviews, mapping data.
Exactly. Massive amounts of free labor building value for the platforms. Advertisers learned to tap into our uncommodified feelings to capture our attention, and then sold that attention to companies who, in turn, tried to commodify bits of our soul, our desires.
It's a strange loop. He says high profits, the exchange value, began depending on this endless supply of experiential values to trounce and cannibalize. Like, it needs to constantly find new parts of us to turn into market opportunities.
Which brings up a really interesting point for debate. If human attention is now a scarce, valuable factor, does that fundamentally change how markets work? Are we talking about attention markets replacing or dominating traditional price markets?
That feels like a core question. Is it less about the price of the thing and more about who can grab and hold our eyeballs?
I think Varoufakis would say absolutely yes. The market for attention becomes central. Competition shifts. It's not just about making a cheaper or better product in the price market. It's about mastering the manipulation of our focus in the attention market. This gives platforms immense power, an extractive power that goes beyond just paying wages. The raw material is our consciousness, our experience.
Okay, building on that, he talks about the rise of the technostructure. He links it back to, surprisingly, Maxwell's equations for electromagnetism.
Yeah, seems like a leap. But his point is that the technologies flowing from that electricity, telegraph grids enabled huge networked top-down corporations, think AT&T, GE. These giants pushed aside smaller local businesses.
And this changed the culture of capitalism, too, from thrift to debt.
Exactly. Parsimony was out. Big spending, big investment, massive debt became the norm for these corporations. The idea shifted to what's good for big business is good for America, which he argues led straight to the Roaring '20s and the 1929 crash.
Then the New Deal, and especially World War II, acted as a dress rehearsal for a different kind of economy.
A managed economy, in a sense. The U.S. government basically guaranteed sales and profits for big business, cut out competition, poured money into R&D like the Manhattan Project, wrapped it all in patriotism. Production exploded, unemployment disappeared.
And this wartime collaboration created the technostructure, this deep entanglement of big business, government, scientists, managers.
A whole new network, yeah.
Yeah.
Their priority became growth and employment, maybe even more than pure profit maximization at that point. But then the war ends, and their big challenge is, how do we keep this massive machine running? How do we manufacture demand for consumer goods on a huge scale?
Enter television and the madmen.
Precisely. Commercial TV grasps the boisterous attention market right onto the existing labor market. It connects the dual nature of labor-paid work versus unpaid experience with the dual nature of the spectacle. A TV show is cultural experience, but it's also captured attention you can sell. So you need creatives like Draper, strategists, engineers focused not just on products, but on manipulating attention, commodifying focus.
Which leads us to this crucial chain of events he lays out, from Bretton Woods right up to big tech today. Bretton Woods, in 1944, he calls it an audacious global financial system designed to stop another Great Depression, right?
Yeah, the goal was stability. Remonetize Europe, Japan, link them to the U.S. war economy, peg the dollar to gold. And he credits this system with capitalism's golden age, low unemployment, low inflation, high growth, less inequality. For a time, anyway.
But then the Nixon shock in 71, the U.S. is spending more abroad than it's earning. People get nervous about the gold backing the dollar.
There's a run on U.S. gold. So Nixon just cuts the cord, depegs the dollar from gold. Suddenly the dollar is backed only by, well, U.S. power, U.S. hegemony. It forces everyone else to keep using dollars anyway. Varoufakis sees this as a really deliberate pivotal move.
A magic trick, he calls it, that birthed the global minotaur. Explain that concept again.
Imagine the U.S. as this mythical creature, constantly consuming imports, running huge trade deficits. But instead of getting weaker, it gets stronger. Because it sucks up all the surplus dollars earned by other countries, Germany, Japan, later China, and persuades them to send those dollars right back to invest in Wall Street. So the reciprocity world basically finances America's consumption and its government debt. This, he says, fueled the insane hubris of bankers leading up to 2008.
Now, here's a critical point to probe. Was this really a deliberate causal chain, a conscious strategy, or is it more like Varoufakis connecting dots after the fact, creating a convenient narrative for his thesis? Could it just be how things happen to unfold?
That's a fair challenge.
Yeah.
Varoufakis definitely frames it as intentional, or at least systemically driven by U.S. interests. He points to how the U.S. protected key sectors, big tech, pharma, banks from foreign takeovers, ensuring the recycled dollars stayed under U.S. influence. And he emphasizes that controlled disintegration under Volcker in the late 70s, early 80s, crushing unions, deregulating banks wasn't accidental. It was necessary groundwork for the minotaur system to function, all disguised by neoliberal free market ideology. So he presents strong evidence for it being more than just happenstance. It feels like a chain reaction, perhaps with unforeseen consequences, but definitely pushed in a certain direction.
Okay, and this financialized system leads directly to what he terms the madness of derivatives. After the Nixon shock, Wall Street power explodes. Computers let them create these incredibly complex financial products.
Derivatives of derivatives, yeah. So complex, he claims, that even the genius engineers who built them didn't fully grasp the risks inside. And here's another point we should interrogate. His thesis isn't just that they were complex, but that they weren't primarily hedges to reduce risk.
Right. He calls them hidden leverage bombs.
Exactly. Fueled by greed and herd behavior. Everyone was buying them, so you bought them too, without really needing to understand the underlying assets, like shaky mortgages. Was it pure hedging, or was it speculation masked by complexity?
His argument is definitely the latter.
Yeah.
That the complexity was the point, obscuring the massive hidden leverage.
And the 2008 crash becomes the proof. Banks slicing and dicing mortgages, packaging them into these opaque derivatives, selling them off quickly for profit, not caring if the homeowners could actually repay. He even mentions GM becoming essentially a hedge fund. It shows how pervasive this financial logic became, supporting his madness of derivatives claim as hidden leverage, not just risk management.
So capitalism mutates, finance goes wild, the system crashes, and out of the ashes, according to Varoufakis, rises cloud capital. This is the bedrock of his technofeudalism. How does he define this new kind of capital?
He calls it a new type of capital, with an unprecedented capacity to command. It's not just money or factories or even weapons in the old sense. It's this huge networked agglomeration machinery, software, AI algorithms, communication hardware, all working together as a produced means of behavior modification.
Okay, wait. Produced means of behavior modification. That's a huge shift from produced means of production, the classic definition of capital.
It's absolutely fundamental. Old capital made things. This new capital, cloud capital, primarily shapes what we do, what we see, what we want, what we buy, even how we think. It's about commanding behavior, not just producing goods. It's intangible command power.
He contrasts Don Draper with Alexa to illustrate this. Draper could influence us one way, but Alexa, or recommendation algorithms,
They're in an infinite loop with us. He says it is training us to train it, train us to train it. It's a constant feedback cycle. It learns our behavior to refine its ability to guide our choices, steer us. This algorithmic cloud-based command capital gets this immense power to curate our reality, modify our behavior in ways Draper couldn't even imagine. And that's how it generates rents.
Let's drill down on that. How exactly does this behavioral data extraction generate rent, and who pays? It sounds like we, the users, are paying with more than just money.
Oh, absolutely. Every time you interact online, like a post, watch a video, search, even just move around with your phone, you're generating data. That's the raw material, free raw material for them. The platforms use this data to train their algorithms. Then those algorithms push specific content, ads, products at you, nudge your behavior in ways that generate revenue for the platform. Maybe an advertiser pays to reach you, or a seller on Amazon pays a commission.
And the lock-in aspect is key too, right?
Crucial. Leaving Facebook means losing years of connections, photos. Leaving Spotify means losing playlists. This algorithmic surveillance isn't passive watching, it's active shaping and locking you in. So the cloud rent is extracted from advertisers paying for access, from sellers paying commissions, and from us, the cloud serfs, paying with our time, our attention, and our unpaid data labor. We are the product, yes, but also the unpaid workforce building the value of the platform.
This ties into his idea of the new enclosures, or cloud fiefs. He draws that direct line to the historical land enclosures.
Yep. Just like common lands were privatized, kicking peasants off and fueling the Industrial Revolution, he argues the open Internet Commons, Internet 1, was enclosed, privatized, fenced off by corporations to create Internet 2, the platform-dominated Internet we live in.
And our digital identity, all that data scattered across Google, Facebook, your bank, he says they own it now, not us, not the state. Trying to resist is like trying to be a hermit.
It's a powerful analogy. The cloudlists as the new feudal lords, controlling the digital land, the essential platforms you must use to participate in modern life. Your digital self becomes their property.
But let's challenge that analogy because it's a strong one. Does the medieval fief comparison really hold up? Feudal estates were stable for centuries. Platforms like MySpace vanish. Facebook might be replaced by TikTok. Cloud fiefs seem so transient compared to land.
That's a really important critique. The stability is definitely different. Land is fixed. Platforms are vulnerable to disruption, technological shifts, changing user tastes. So the specific fief might be temporary. However, Varoufakis might counter that while individual platforms can rise and fall, the underlying model of cloudless control and rent extraction persists. The power structure remains, just maybe shifting to the next dominant platform. The core mechanism, using algorithms to command behavior and extract cloud rent from users and businesses accessing the platform, that's a constant, he'd argue. The ultimate threat isn't losing your land, but getting kicked off the platform, delinked to kind of sanitized tech terror.
Okay, so the form of the fief might change, but the feudal relationship of dependence and rent extraction remains. That leads to his categories: cloud serfs and vassal capitalists.
Right. We, the users, are the cloud serfs. The most valuable part of cloud capital isn't just the servers or code, it's the content we provide for free. Our posts, photos, reviews, data. It's massive free labor that trains, maintains, and expands the cloud capital of the platform owners.
We're constantly feeding the beast, unpaid.
And then you have the vassal capitalists. These are traditional businesses, maybe app developers, Amazon marketplace sellers, even Uber drivers using their own cars. They still operate businesses, maybe hire people, seek profit, but they have to pay tribute, a cloud rent, to the cloudless Apple, Google, Amazon, Uber, just for access to the market, to the platform's users. Their own profit margins get squeezed, their power diminishes. They're like feudal vassals paying the lord for the right to work the land.
Which brings us to that really provocative claim. Profit becomes optional for the cloudalists. Is that really true? Is profit obsolete for Google or Amazon, or is it just changing shape?
This is probably one of the most challenging ideas in the book. He argues that especially after 2008, with central banks flooding the system with money, socialism for financiers, he calls it, we entered gilded stagnation. Consumer income wasn't really growing, so traditional companies often stopped investing in new production. Instead, they did share buybacks, pumping up their stock price, benefiting executives and shareholders, but not necessarily growing the real economy.
Right, financial engineering over actual engineering.
Exactly. And in this environment, the cloudalists like Bezos and Musk built their massive cloud capital empires, often without generating huge profits in the traditional way, or borrowing heavily from banks initially. How? They mopped up billions flowing through the financial system, fueled indirectly by that central bank money, through soaring stock valuations. Their rising shares became collateral. It wasn't competitive profit driving their expansion, he argues. It was access to this cheap money and the promise of future rent extraction.
So the valuation is based on potential future rents and user control, not current profits.
That's the core argument. Adam Smith thought profit would always overcome rent-seeking. Varoufakis says that's now reversed. Cloud rent, the digital equivalent of ground rent paid to a landowner, is the main driver. Profit becomes optional for the cloudalist because their power comes from controlling the digital space and extracting rent from everyone else who needs access, the vassal capitalists and the cloud serfs.
So profit still exists elsewhere in the system, for the vassals perhaps, but it's no longer the prime mover for the dominant players. They've transcended it through rent.
Precisely. He points to the huge asset managers like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. Their power comes from owning slices of everything, extracting fees and influencing companies across the board, rent-seeking on a massive scale. Activities like dividend recapitalization, loading companies with debt to pay out shareholders became rampant because money is so cheap. It signals a fundamental shift. Rent triumphs over profit as the primary mode of accumulation for the new dominant class. The cloudalists as the new digital landlords. This marks the withering of capitalism, ironically through hypercharged capitalist activity itself.
Okay, so this techno-feudal system isn't just theoretical. Varoufakis sees its logic playing out globally, even in something like Elon Musk's chaotic takeover of Twitter, now X. He argues it wasn't just a whim.
No, he sees a clear techno-feudal logic. Musk had Tesla, SpaceX successful, yes, but rooted more in making physical things, albeit advanced ones. What he lacked, Varoufakis argues, was a direct gateway to those massive cloud rents. He didn't own a major digital fiefdom.
So buying Twitter was about building his own fief, the everything app ambition.
Exactly. Turn it into a dominant cloud fief, integrate payments, messaging, everything. The goal? Attract massive attention, modify behavior, extract free labor, content from most cloud serfs, and charge vendors cloud rent for access. It's a classic techno-feudal power grab, aiming to control a key piece of the digital territory.
And what about the great inflation we've all been feeling? He doesn't see it as just too much money chasing too few goods.
No, he calls it a social power game. Inflation always has winners and losers, and in a techno-feudal world, the power lies with cloud capital. They can use their leverage over platforms and supply chains to push costs onto consumers and squeeze wages for cloud proles, gig workers, platform-dependent labor, and also squeeze traditional vassal capitalists.
He even connects it to the green energy transition. How does that fit?
Because the shift to green energy often requires highly decentralized, digitally integrated systems. Think smart grids, IoT devices managing energy flow, AI optimizing distribution. This makes the transition inherently cloud capital intensive. So even solving climate change, paradoxically, enhances the power and centrality of the cloudalists who control that infrastructure. They become even more indispensable, deepening their rent-extracting power.
Wow. Okay, let's turn to geopolitics. He revisits his global Minotaur idea in the context of a new Cold War. Remind us of the Minotaur's role again.
The Minotaur was the U.S. trade deficit acting like a global vacuum cleaner, sucking in surpluses from other countries, especially China, Germany, Japan, and recycling them back into Wall Street investments. This fueled global demand, but also U.S. financial power. Crucially, the U.S. protected its own key tech and finance sectors from being bought out.
But the landscape changed after 2008, especially with China.
Dramatically. China's massive stimulus after 2008 basically saved global capitalism at that moment, Varoufakis argues, and hugely boosted its own global standing. This allowed it to develop its own powerful version of technofeudalism, think WeChat, Alipay, creating a parallel digital ecosystem. Technofeudalism with Chinese characteristics.
Which naturally created tension with the U.S. system. But does that old Minotaur model, U.S. deficits driving global demand, even apply anymore in this more multipolar world with China rising and others seeking alternatives to the dollar?
That's a key geopolitical question Varoufakis tackles. He argues the old Minotaur system is effectively dying, or at least fundamentally changing. The Russia-Ukraine war acted as a massive catalyst. When the U.S. and allies froze Russia's central bank dollar assets, an unprecedented move, it sent shockwaves, especially through Beijing. It showed the vulnerability of relying on the dollar system.
So China doubled down on its own system, yuan-based cloud finance, digital currency.
Exactly, pushing its own alternatives much harder. This caused others, wealthy individuals and states outside the Western Bloc, to start diversifying away from the dollar too. The Minotaur's grip weakened.
And the U.S. response? Biden's chip ban targeting China?
Varoufakis reads that as the U.S. declaring total economic war. Not just about chips, but about crippling China's ability to build the advanced cloud infrastructure needed for its own techno-feudal system to challenge U.S. dominance. This, he claims, forced Beijing to choose sides, internally shifting support away from its traditional export-oriented capitalists, who depended on the U.S. market, the old dark deal, and towards its own burgeoning cloudalists. The result? The world splitting into two mutually antagonistic super cloud fiefs. The Minotaur isn't gone, maybe, but his domain is fractured. This definitely feels like a deliberate geopolitical chess game, a causal chain reaction.
A chilling picture. So in this escalating conflict, this polycrisis, who wins and who loses overall?
Well, according to Varoufakis, most people lose. The unpaid labor of cloud serfs and the wage squeeze on cloud proles means less income for the masses to buy stuff, leading to deeper economic stagnation or crises.
A shrinking value base globally.
Right. And the breakdown of that old U.S.-China dark deal hurts everyone initially. American rentiers lose out on those recycled Chinese surpluses flowing into Wall Street. Chinese capitalists lose access to the huge U.S. market. But relatively, the cloudalists in both blocs gain power over traditional capitalists. And the biggest casualty? Democracy. The sheer concentration of power in these cloudless hands makes genuine democratic control seem increasingly far-fetched.
He makes a rather startling point that the only force currently checking the power of China's cloudalists is the Chinese Communist Party itself.
It's a paradoxical observation, isn't it? That an authoritarian state might be the only entity currently capable of or willing to rein in the power of its own tech giants, albeit for its own reasons. A stark commentary on the power dynamics involved.
Okay, so if this is the grim reality of techno-feudalism, Varoufakis doesn't just diagnose, he looks for escape routes. But first, he laments what he calls the death of the liberal individual. What does he mean by that?
He argues this system shatters us into fragments of data. It steals our focus, reinforces our biases through filter bubbles, and even amplifies bigotry. Why? Because the algorithms optimizing for cloud rents find that hatred and discontent often generate more engagement, more clicks, more data, more rent. He also suggests that identity politics, while often important, can sometimes distract from this underlying economic power structure. It focuses on divisions that the system itself might be exploiting, rather than the system generating those rents from division.
It's a bleak view of how the tech shapes us socially. He also takes aim at crypto, Bitcoin, NFTs. They emerged from the 2008 crisis with this promise of decentralization, right? Bypassing banks, bypassing states.
Exactly. A potential democratic alternative to the centralized control of money and finance. That was the dream for many.
But he calls it a false promise. Why?
Because, he argues, it very quickly became dominated by speculation. It turned into just another currency market, with insiders issuing their own fiat money, new coins, tokens, often for huge personal profit. It lost that early emancipatory promise. Instead of democratizing finance, it largely became another playground for speculative bubbles and rent-seeking, failing to challenge the fundamental power structures.
So, if crypto isn't the answer, what is? He sketches out an alternative in his book, Another. Now, imagining a different path taken after 2008, a kind of techno-democracy.
Right. It's a blueprint for a post-capitalist, technologically advanced, but fundamentally socialist and democratic society. He asks, what if the protest movements back then had actually reshaped the system? One key idea is democratize companies. Every employee gets one single, non-transferable vote or share. They govern the company collectively. This radically eliminates the wage versus profit divide for workers, gets rid of stock markets as we know them, kills private equity, and likely leads to smaller firms. Control over capital, including cloud capital within the firm, becomes democratic.
And there's a Social Accountability Act. How would that work?
Randomly selected citizen juries would grade companies on things like ethics, environmental impact, social contribution. Consistently bad grades, you could lose your registration. It's a direct democratic check on corporate power, including cloud capital's potential for harm.
He also tackles money itself, democratized money.
Yeah, a free digital wallet from the central bank. For everyone, a true monetary commons. It could deliver universal basic income directly. Savings would flow into this public system, not private banks, stripping bankers of their power to gamble with public money. Investment decisions could be made more democratically, funding projects based on need, not just profit potential, and oversight by a mixed jury of citizens and experts.
The state gets funded differently, too.
Taxes on company revenue, not profit, to discourage financial gains. Plus taxes on commercial land use, and that land itself gets democratized. County associations of citizens manage land, creating social housing funded by rents from commercial zones. A land commons alongside the monetary commons.
It's a comprehensive vision. So when he talks about collective ownership of the cloud, is he talking nationalizing Google or something else? And how does this compare to, say, just stronger antitrust rules or data trusts?
It's more radical than just antitrust. Antitrust breaks up monopolies, but might leave the underlying extractive logic of cloud capital intact. You might get more competitors, but they could still be extracting rent via behavioral data. Data trusts are maybe a step, giving users more control over their data, but still potentially framing it as individual property within a market system. Varoufakis envisions something more fundamental, socializing the infrastructure itself. Not necessarily state ownership like the old days, but democratic collective control by users and workers. Think of the Internet's core protocols or the algorithms themselves becoming part of a digital commons governed democratically rather than being private corporate property used for rent extraction. His democratized companies model applied to the platforms themselves.
So a fundamental shift in ownership and control, not just regulation. He then calls for a cloud rebellion. How realistic is that? He compares it to 19th century unions facing violence.
He acknowledges it's a tall order, absolutely. But he insists it's possible, pointing to real-world experiments already happening, even if small scale. Things like data unions or platform co-ops, where users band together to control their data or own the platform they use.
Are there other examples? Things that might actually dent the power of these tech giants?
He highlights the EU's Digital Markets Act. Its focus on forcing interoperability, like letting you switch messaging apps without losing your contacts and history, or move music playlists between services, is something the big platforms really fear. It breaks down their walled gardens, their user lock-in, which is a key source of their rent-extracting power. He also floats ideas like pension fund activism. Imagine millions withholding contributions from funds invested in companies engaging in asset stripping or using zero-hours contracts. Or even transparency viruses like WikiLeaks, exposing shady deals between cloudalists and governments.
Using the cloud's own tools against the cloudalists. But the power imbalance is immense. Can these efforts truly succeed? And one final thought, maybe pushing beyond the book slightly. Varoufakis emphasizes our uncommodified creative labor, our experiential value, as the free fuel for cloud capital. But what about generative AI?
That's a huge question now, isn't it?
If AI can turn out text, images, music content that mimics human creativity and can be bought and sold, does that undermine his point? Does it mean even that experiential value can now be commodified or at least replicated at scale by algorithms, further devaluing the free labor of us cloud serfs?
That's a deeply troubling extension of his logic, and you're right. It potentially challenges the idea that our core creativity is inherently uncommodifiable. If AI can generate synthetic experiential value content that feels authentic or engaging, it could flood the system. It doesn't mean our human creativity itself is directly commodified in the same way Marx talked about labor time, perhaps. But it could drastically reduce the relative value and uniqueness of our unpaid contributions to the platforms. We'd be competing not just with each other's free content, but with tireless AI content generators. It arguably makes the cloud serf even more precarious, their unique contribution less essential to the rent-seeking machine. It definitely raises the stakes for reclaiming agency in the face of ever more powerful algorithms.
Hashtag tag outro, have my baby.
Wow, this has been an incredibly dense and, frankly, mind-bending deep dive. We've explored Yanis Varoufakis' argument that the internet didn't strengthen capitalism, but instead birthed this new thing, cloud capital, which killed its host and replaced it with technofeudalism, a system driven by digital rent, not profit. Yeah, and the picture he paints is pretty stark. The bad news is this potential new era of digital serfdom, where cloudalists hold immense power, democracy feels threatened, and even huge global challenges like climate change get harder to tackle because of these competing super cloud fiefs.
It's a concerning outlook. But there's a flip side, right? He also argues there's good news. Ironically, the very technologies driving this also give us tools we've never had before. The potential for a digital commons, for truly democratized companies, money, even land.
Exactly. Tools that neither the old Soviet planners nor the 20th century Social Democrats possessed. There's potential, he argues, for a bottom-up, technologically advanced system that could genuinely empower people.
So it leaves us at this critical fork in the road, as he puts it. Are these tools going to lead us towards a kind of Star Trek future technology enhancing humanity? Or more like a Matrix dystopia, where we're just batteries fueling the machine empire?
Our own technology forces these choices on us, these contradictions. Varoufakis stresses we have to act, make choices, without any guarantees of success, hoping for that successful cloud rebellion to build a system where humans can actually flourish.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now?
Well, it's definitely a call to awareness, to recognize that the devices you use, the platforms you engage with, aren't neutral. They're actively shaping a new economic and social reality. It's about understanding where power really lies now and deciding what role you want to play. Do you accept the terms, or do you, as Varoufakis ends his book, consider uniting? His final words are a direct echo of another manifesto. Cloud serfs, cloud proles, and cloud vassals of the world unite. We have nothing to lose but our mind chains. Something to think about. Join us next time for another deep dive.